Hi, how you doing? Here I am. Another book I wish all Americans would read, but at least I want my kids to have this info to see what kind of country this is now. History was even greater than today, but then I hope this will become a history that we can be proud of again. And this is info that didn't come out on the media. They won't talk about stuff like this. They just do whatever their editor tells them to write, and whoever he works for, then you'll find out by what they talk about in it and how they put it. Because there's few medias that are unbiased, but simply putting what certain political people who are paying them money to tell people and approve it. So this book is Forbidden Workers, Enforced Labor Laws. Illegal Chinese Immigrants and American Labor by Peter Kwong. And I'll read you the description on the flaps. Movingly and incisively told, Forbidden Workers is a human drama, indeed a thoroughly American story of migrants and those who profit from their plight and labor. Gary Y. Okero, author of Margins and Mainstreams, Asians in American History and Culture. Forbidden Workers tells the full story of recent Chinese immigration to this country. Author Peter Kwong has interviewed countless workers, activists, Chinatown power brokers, and snakeheads, smugglers who bring immigrants to the United States, and has traveled to China to talk with families of immigrants. The result is an unprecedented look at an invisible community within American society, and at a billion-dollar industry whose commodity is workers who labor in conditions approaching modern slavery. From the villages of Fuzhou province in mainland China to the restaurants and garment factories of New York City's and San Francisco's Chinatowns, Kwong traces immigrants' lives and exposes the contradictions in our national immigration and labor practices. Combining a profound grasp of the harsh dynamics of the new political economy with an infinite knowledge of the toils of Chinese immigrant workers, Peter Kwong guides us into the twilight world of snakes and snakeheads that surround us. Aristide Zollberg, Director, International Center for Migration, Ethnicity, and Citizenship, New School for Social Research. And to Peter Kwong, he is the chair of the Asian American Studies program at Hunter College in New York and author of The New Chinatown. He has written on immigration issues for a number of publications, including The Village Voice and The Nation. And he's a really good writer. Oop, here's his picture. I know, my cam sucks. Can't fix it, but this is the best you can see him. And I wanted to read you his final note on this. He writes very good, and he tells a lot of details that people need to know. Details, details, details are so important. And his final note. A conservative estimate of the number of illegal immigrants currently in the United States is 5 million, and over 60% of them are Mexicans and Central Americans. The number of funhousees is illegals is small by comparison, but they are unique. They are victims of a large-scale and sophisticated international human smuggling network. After arrival in the United States, they are forced to work for years under what amounts to indentured servitude to pay off large transportation debts, with constant threats of torture, rape, and kidnapping. In 1862, the U.S. Congress suspected that Chinese laborers were imported to this country under the coolie system, which was very similar to the system the Funhousenes are presently submitted to, and passed a law which forbade such trade on American vessels and at American ports. Today, there is still no American law that specifically sanctions indentured migrant labor trafficking. Smuggling unfree labor for profit is barbaric and should be outlawed, just as was the slave trade, which was banned in the 19th century by European states. In the Immigration Reform Act of 1996, the U.S. Congress imposed tougher penalties on those who smuggle immigrants into the country. But the new act made no reference to migrant smuggling in conjunction with indentured servitude. Further, this practice is no longer limited only to the Funhousenes. Smugglers are now charging $28,000 to bring in Indians and Pakistanis, and $8,000 to bring Poles through Native American reservations on the New York-Canada border. Yes, they're guilty. The coast to Southeast Asia women, often in years of indentured service as white slaves in the prostitution industry. It is high time for the U.S. Congress to pass a law that specifically criminalizes human smuggling and enslavement of individuals and calls for maximum sentencing. Severe additional punishment should be imposed for crimes involving kidnapping and torture. Yes, sir, he is exactly right. The United States is by no means the only country afflicted by this curse. Human smuggling and enslavement have reached international proportions. According to the latest information, the smugglers now charge the Chinese $25,000 to enter Japan. To enter Germany, Afghans pay $10,000 for an individual and $33,000 for a family. In Australia, young women from Thailand are forced to work in brothels to pay off contracted debts of up to $35,000. The federal police there have recently raised concern about the lack of anti-slavery laws in the country. As the receiving countries tighten their borders and make entry more difficult, the smuggling fees keep rising, and the pattern of indentured servitude is likely to be even more prevalent. International anti-trafficking statutes have existed since the early last century, when the first steps to combat traffic in slaves were taken by European states. Over the course of this century, a number of universal and regional legislations were passed dealing with child labor, forced prostitution, and trafficking in migrants. The International Labor Organization, ILO, Convention 97, 1949, concerning migration for employment is one of them, and it calls for punishment of persons who promote clandestine or illegal immigration. The ILO Convention 143 in 1975, which contains punitive measures aimed at employers and traffickers of clandestine migrants, is another. There is also the United Nations Economic and Social Council Resolution 1993/30 on the suppression of the traffic in persons and of the exploitation of the prostitution of others. More recently, there has been a series of international treaties aimed at the protection of children from child labor and other forms of abuses, such as the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child in 1989. In a 1994 UN General Assembly resolution, the international body reminds member states of their duty to prevent alien smuggling by enforcing human rights and maritime rules. The problem with these conventions is that they exist piecemeal and do not address migrant trafficking in connection to forced labor in general. Their attention focuses only on child labor and forced prostitution. More importantly, although these declarations and conventions against migrant trafficking have been on the international agenda for a long time, there has been no effort to translate them into uniform criminal legislation in individual countries. In fact, a number of states do not even recognize human smuggling as a crime. And that would probably be Oklahoma added. In addition, most governments that do deal with the problem of human smuggling concentrate on sanctioning and deporting migrants without effectively attacking the trafficking networks. The overall consequence is reflected in the seriousness of the current migrant trafficking problem in most of the receiving countries. What is long overdue is an international conference of the United States and other immigrant receiving states for the purpose of establishing an international convention against forced labor migrant trafficking. It should address migrant smuggling for all forms of indentured labor, not just forced prostitution and child labor, as major targets of law enforcement and severe prosecution. The signatories should establish a comprehensive international criminal code regarding migrant trafficking and forced labor so that the law enforcement authorities in different countries have a clear understanding of their authority and responsibilities. The harmonization of laws is imperative for effectively combating the problem. The code should stipulate that all nations have the responsibility to implement such laws, i.e., to arrest and prosecute trafficking criminals, as well as to cooperate with other states in the pursuit of such crimes. Those that do not would face specific international sanctions. Insofar as the Chinese human smugglers in the United States are concerned, they can never be effectively dealt with without the cooperation of the government of Taiwan and mainland China. The Fushao local branch of the Chinese Public Security Office did cooperate with the major case squad of the New York City Police Department in the arrest of snakeheads involved in the infamous Peach Blossom kidnapping and murder case. This kind of cooperation is unfortunately rare and based on local initiatives. The United States should therefore present the issue of human smuggling at the top of national concern for discussion in all future bilateral negotiations with Taiwan and the People's Republic of China. A special bilateral task force should be formed and put in charge of coordinating efforts for the detection, arrest, and prosecution of suspected human smugglers. The United States should expect full cooperation from the law enforcement authorities of the two countries in providing background files in the investigation of such crimes and in extraditing suspected human smugglers for trial. The most difficult aspect of dealing with human smugglers are the lack of accurate information on the criminal enterprise and getting people to testify in courts once the criminals are apprehended. The people who know about the smuggling operations are the illegal aliens themselves, and there are no incentives for them to come forward. The only time U.S. law enforcement officials are informed of the activities of the human smugglers is when the illegal aliens come forward under extreme duress, such as when they are being tortured or kidnapped and threatened with death. Even then, there is no guarantee that the illegals will cooperate fully. For law enforcement to get the upper hand in the situation, it would have to make it clear to the illegals they would be protected by U.S. institutions. Undocumented aliens who enter this country through the service of human smuggling networks who are willing to cooperate with law enforcement by providing details of the smuggling process, divulging the names of those who prey upon them during transit and in safe houses, and by standing in court as witnesses, should be able to expect an adjustment of their immigration status. Moreover, the U.S. government should seek assurance from the PRC government that relatives of individuals who cooperated with the U.S. law enforcement will be given full protection against retribution in China. Amnesty for a few victims would be a small price to pay in order to stop indentured migrant trafficking and the present practice of targeting certain racially distinct immigrant groups as exploitable, low-wage workers under the subcontracting system. This practice is literally turning them into permanent